Ever since we started grade school, we've all been told that we need a big, strong government to look after us. And that, sure, it may need fixing here and there, but generally today's government size is about right. We disagree. We think that government is a parasite, living off what you and I earn and using our money to do unpleasant things to us. From being a nation of self-reliant go-getters, America is fast becoming a country of government junkies. We think an alternative exists, one that puts you back in charge of your own life and destiny. We call it the freedom alternative.
Good evening. I'm Peter Verderosa, and welcome to another edition of The Freedom Alternative. And our thanks to all who called in with comments and questions last week. Our contact number, by the way, is 1-257-4844. And we'd be pleased to hear from you. Today, we'll visit a musician, Don Wood of Groton, who teaches piano. It sounds like a simple and innocent way to earn a living, but the performing arts are riddled with government meddlers, as we will learn. It seems the politicians can't keep their hands off it. First, let's offer some comment you'll not have heard anywhere else on a few items of recent news.
Hello, I'm Jim Davies from Richfield. 3 weeks ago on this show, we had as a guest Mr. Edwin Thrall of Broad Brook near East Windsor. We showed you how 20 years ago this craftsman built a dance hall, but how government has prevented him opening it all this time until he submits to their authority and tells those bureaucrats how he built it. By the time you see this broadcast, the situation may have changed, but today, March 26th, Ed Thrall is in jail. Did he harm anyone or steal their property? No way. He is as innocent as you or I. Nor is his incarceration a penalty for appearing on the Freedom Alternative. So future and other previous guests can relax. It was just that some weeks ago, a party of government bureaucrats trespassed on his property and refused to leave when he told them to get off. Then he used reasonable force to eject them. He happened at the time to be sitting on his tractor, so he gave them clear warning to drive off and then aimed his tractor at their car. That was highly effective. They burned rubber. But then they turned around and had Ed Thrall arrested for, quote, threatening behavior and reckless endangerment, unquote. He was later found innocent of the latter, but guilty of the former. Yes, he actually threatened a government trespasser. The judge fined him $500. The trespassers were let go scot-free. But Ed Thrall said that since the government had prevented him earning his living from the dance hall, he didn't have $500, so would not pay. So yesterday, the judge put him in jail instead. It's understood that he will stay there for 50 days if he declines to work, or for 20 days if he works. That differential rate of $15 a day is apparently what government people think a man's labor is worth. If any of you are planning to file a tax return next month, you might bear that rate in mind. Personally, I think it's a bit low. But remember, those government labor rate setters have to judge by what they see of other government workers all around them, so perhaps we should not blame them. One day, when all the names of these petty bureaucrats and governors lie forgotten in the trash can of history, we think Ed Thrall's name will be honored as a hero of 20th century American resistance. Meanwhile, you can help. Don't offer to send $500 to bail him out. He's already had that offer and refused it. However, you can first write to him in jail. Whatever your reason for being there, a jail is a lonely place. The address is Edwin Thrall, Jennings Road Detention Center, 50 Jennings Road, Hartford, Connecticut 06120. And while your pen is out, why not write also to Governor Lowell Weicker at the state capitol, demanding Ed's immediate and unconditional release, and that all the cost of his incarceration be paid not by us taxpayers, but personally by the selectmen of the town of East Windsor.
We came across a report that our state government wants to forbid residents to take part in out-of-state lotteries. This piles obscenity on top of obscenity. We don't advise people to gamble, but if they do, It's their business and nobody else's, certainly not government's. Yet, for most of this century and most of our states, governments have meddled with the gambling trade every which way. Mostly, they want to ban it so as to appear virtuous and responsible. Fat chance. Then, desperate to grab more money than taxpayers can be conned into voting for, they contradicted themselves and became big-time gambling operators instead. It is apparently a sin when done for profit, but a virtue when done for government. Are you feeling ill yet? There's more. Having gotten into the business, but knowing they could never compete with honest gambling companies, they promptly granted themselves monopolies so as to be the only game in town. Welcome to a short history of state lotteries. Now, in this recent report, the Hartford mob wants not only to outlaw non-governmental gambling, but also non-Connecticut governmental gambling. Are you throwing up yet? There's worse to come. Just suppose they write this nonsense into law. Just imagine, will you, how they are going to police it. You want to buy a lottery ticket, let's say, in the New York State Lottery. You dare not use the mail in case their friends in the government postal monopoly scan your mail and squeal on you. So you drive across the state line and buy secretly at a convenience store. Your dreams come true and you win. Your name goes up in lights. And once your Connecticut address is read out, your name goes up in lights in the offices of the State Gambling Monopoly Enforcement Police in Hartford. You're sent to jail for breaking their law. And the $1 million you thought you just won is taxed at 100%, it's confiscated. So transferring a cool million from the pockets of New York gamblers to the bottomless pit of the Hartford mob. Al Capone never came close to operating a scheme as demonic as that. Yet he was recognized as a mobster and put where mobsters belong.
Last week, in reminding you that the state government wants to thrust an income tax down our throats, oh, and by the way, don't forget to protest it by driving with your headlights on all day April 15th, we said that instead of raising taxes, it should slash spending anyway at once. Just across to our west, in Albany, New York, we saw what happens when a state government announces plans to cut spending. All the pigs who are feeding at the public trough rushed headlong to the state capitol to squeal and squeal. In that case, students and teachers, led by trade union rabble-rousers, surrounded it and actually broke down its doors. That led some of our critics to ask whether that's what we want in Hartford, and whether we want blood running in the streets, and whether we're in our right minds. Well, the answers are no, no, and yes. You see, those protesters didn't know it and were very badly led, but they were actually protesting the same things that we are. They haven't seen it this way yet, but they are complaining at the system just like us. Sure, they were asking for cuts not to be made, but if any of them had paused to think, they would have realized that the reason they're afraid of losing their jobs or their student grants is that they have been made dependent on an utterly corrupt, monopolistic system, one that pays them with stolen money, under conditions set by politicians, driven by somebody else's votes. Like we told you before, democracy is two wolves and a lamb voting on what to have for lunch. If schools and colleges were all run commercially for profit or for charity, and if the taxes now funding them were zeroized, students could use that money to buy a far better education, and the teachers would have far better jobs and career opportunities. They would be able to shop around between competing employers, and if their pay was too low, they'd not need to break doors down, they would just walk through them to a teaching job across town that pays better. That's the freedom alternative.
Now to our featured subject for the week, music. Worth noting, government can distort the arts, which have a tremendous influence on our society, at very low cost. On this program, we often tell you about the obscene amount of taxation around us. Unfortunately, here is an area where government can still mess things up even if taxes were trimmed close to zero. Let's go over now and see what Donald Wood has in store for us.
Don, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the Freedom Alternative.
Thank you.
I wonder if you'd mind explaining, for the benefit of me and our viewers, what that little scenario with Richard Wagner and Adolf Hitler, what was that all about?
Well, that's a little reminiscent of something that happened a few years ago in Israel, connecting with how badly things can go when government gets involved in subsidizing art. It happened in Tel Aviv some years back that a number of citizens in Israel took to picketing and protesting a concert hall where one of the state orchestras was performing the music of Wagner. This for the first time since the founding of Israel. Wagner was more than just a genius in opera and orchestral music connected with opera, but he was an anti-Semitic bigot and a socialist and the favorite composer of Hitler and of the Nazis. And small wonder that for decades following World War II, his music would be out of favor with Holocaust survivors,
Yeah.
Israelis.
Yeah.
In time, a number of musicians, obviously in Israel, had made their intellectual or musical peace with Wagner and wanted to go on and perform his music. But other people, I think, certainly are within their rights in feeling that they didn't want to see their tax dollars spent performing the music of this favorite composer of Nazis and
Right.
anti-Semitic bigot.
Yeah.
So these people quite reasonably took to picketing the concert hall and protesting, having their money spent performing the music of Wagner.
Right. Now, is this idea of government subsidizing the arts, is that happening today here in Connecticut?
It is, I'm afraid so. Right here in Groton, there's a local group of art aficionados who've latched their little talons into public money, surrendered by the public without any choice in the matter. It's tax dollars after all.
Mm-hmm.
And the Connecticut Commission on the Arts is a state agency that ladles out money collected from all citizens, including non-favored artists, and given to favored artists.
And how do you get on the list of artists who can receive this handout from the public trough?
Well, the Commission has a list of criterion that it looks for, and of course they also make a point of indicating that they look for quality art and art that, in their opinion, is worth subsidizing.
Oh, of course. I mean, I suppose they're going to make the point that quality art would never see the light of day if they didn't help it along. Is that what they're saying?
They're free to make that claim, but history refutes them. One of the things that the art, the culture vultures are fond of saying is that if it weren't for government intervention in the arts, great art simply wouldn't get played, wouldn't get performed, great stuff wouldn't be commissioned.
Okay.
And they point with maybe a little justification, limited to the 1700s when dukes, princes, and people like that, the people with the money, the monarchs, parted with some of their gold and some of their
Right.
coin to subsidize composers. Haydn, a pioneer in the development of the symphony, for much of his life worked in the employ of Prince Esterhazy.
Oh, Prince, right.
But toward the end of his life, it developed that this wasn't necessary for his artistic achievement or development. The last 12 symphonies, of which here are merely 6,
Mm-hmm.
were written on a commission from a private enterprise impresario from London, England. The last 12 are arguably his best, the culmination of his work, and they were written entirely not at taxpayer expense, not at the expense of anybody being gouged by the taxman or any monarchist, but by a profit-seeking Briton who came to England.
Okay.
Came over from England, talked to Haydn, and put together a contract and
Okay.
organized the performances.
So the argument of those in government today who want to take taxpayer money and give it to certain artists whom they think are worth it is that in all of the classical period of hundreds of years of classical music development, that's what government did with fine results. You're saying that argument is ill-founded. Is that your point?
Right. Yeah, that argument started to fall apart in the toward the end of Haydn's lifetime,
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't hold water even to this century. Arturo Toscanini, when he fled fascist Italy, came to the United States and got connected not with any symphony that ran on tax dollars, but with one connected with a large corporation, the National Broadcasting Corporation.
Oh.
And here is a recording of the Beethoven 9 symphonies done by the NBC Symphony
Yeah.
Orchestra.
Yeah.
So the money for these performances came out of the hands, came out of corporate coffers, not from the hands of working people that were given no choice in the matter. Great art, and arguably one of the best conductors of this century.
You were mentioning earlier that there was, I think, an Austrian who had something to do with the bringing out of Beethoven as a composer. What was his name?
He wouldn't have had anything to do with it if he had a choice in the matter. He was an established musician named Albertsberger, and he was connected with St. Stephen's Cathedral. And had to say of Beethoven, okay, here we go with the quote, "He has never learned anything, and he can do nothing in decent style." Close quote. And that's the word of an established musical expert in Austria.
If he'd had his way then?
If he'd had his way, the Austrian government would not have given Beethoven any of his own tax dollars back, nor any tax dollars of anyone else. This is, I think, evidence that people who say that the art commissions are composed of experts who will give money to good artists, that these people are on thin ice, because established musical experts do make big mistakes, as Albertsberger did.
You've demonstrated that.
When he slighted Beethoven.
In the context of Connecticut today, then, what is a subsidy and how does it work? How does it get handed out? What's the mechanism?
Well, when a subsidy is employed by a private company, that simply amounts to a private individual or a corporation giving of its own volition something of its own. When a subsidy is employed by a state that gets its money from taxation, a subsidy amounts to shoplifting in reverse. Well, think of it this way. As you know, shoplifting would involve somebody taking merchandise from a store or possibly eating a meal and then leaving the store or the restaurant without paying for that. And nobody has any trouble recognizing that as a moral wrong and as a crime that ought to be punished. What would be the moral status of a restaurateur or a shop owner who sent you a bill for merchandise you hadn't taken or a meal you hadn't eaten? That would certainly be shoplifting in reverse, right?
Yeah, it's one of the bills I might not pay.
Given a choice, you wouldn't. Right. But, thanks to the magic of taxation, Connecticut Commission on the Arts, and much else, you're forced to. You're forced to hand your money over to people who put on operas you didn't attend, ballets you didn't go to, who provide services that you never use. So it quite literally is shoplifting in reverse.
I understand.
And two, you have to wonder about the morality of the legislators that create this, and about the complacency, almost the submissiveness of taxpayers who tolerate it. You know, our government has three branches, which are the executive, the legislative, and the judicial, and none of us would tolerate such inversions of morality in the other two branches. If a shopkeeper ran out of a store into the middle of the street, grabbed the attention of a policeman and said, "That man took nothing from my store, make him pay," we wouldn't tolerate the policeman who clubbed the man into submission and made him pay the shopkeeper. If someone came before Judge Wapner on the People's Court and said, "Your Honor, I took this total stranger off the street and expect him to pay for furniture that I never sold him and never built him," we'd suggest that the judge get his head examined if he found in favor of the shopkeeper against the non-customer. So we wouldn't accept, but strangely we do accept this weird code of ethics from legislators.
About how much in the course of an average year in Connecticut is transferred in this manner from taxpayers to favored artistic musical groups, and do you know what kind of music they subsidize at the expense of what kind of other music they don't?
Okay, I don't at the moment, but hang on a moment, let me get the governor's budget and I'll be right back.
All right, come on.
Okay, well, here it is. Here's the Governor Weiker's budget for the state, and you can see they trimmed all the fat out of this baby. Connecticut Commission on the Arts this year wants to spend $2,853,000 and change on its idea of good art. Now, specifically what type of art they're putting out, I don't know. It's not itemized, broken down into string quartets and symphonies and ballets. Truthfully, they do a little bit of everything. There are plays, poetry. Some of it's, to my mind, good, some of it's not good, but none of it justifies using force to pay for it.
So the amount that the Connecticut government takes from taxpayers and gives to artists is about $2 or $3 million thereabouts. Well, that's $2 or $3 million too much, I would agree, but at the same time, in the context of a $7 billion overall budget, isn't very much.
No, but when you hear people talk that way, and you do hear a lot of it from legislators and the arts grants administrators, and
Yeah.
they talk that way a lot, you're hearing the morality of shoplifters. The shoplifter rationalizes his theft as being not so bad because he says that the company that he took the merchandise from had billions to begin with, so what's $20 here or there? And then they go on to say that anyway, this company doesn't even eat the loss, they just pad the price of the remaining merchandise a penny and a half, so what's the big deal?
They put a little bit of shrinkage in the price, in other words. I think that's the term used in retail, isn't it?
Is it?
Yeah, I've heard that before.
Well,
Shrinkage, a delicate word.
the bottom line is that the people who are honest are forced to pay for the people who are dishonest.
Exactly right.
And it's over the last few months, there's been a lot of controversy about the Mapplethorpe and Serrano photographs, and shouldn't people consider doing away with the National Endowment for the Arts? One of the directors of that said, well, if you only knew how little our National Endowments for the Arts cost you, you know, it's something like 18 cents per year per citizen.
Yeah.
Well, that's exactly it. You're hearing the shoplifter morality.
Yeah, it's probably a bit more than that, but not much more. That's his point, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, but his point is that the millions that they spend only amount to pennies from every citizen,
Right.
so what's the big deal?
Yeah.
And that is exactly a shoplifter
Yeah,
talking.
yeah, exactly. Are there any ways in which government influences what the public sees and hears by way of music and culture, apart from promoting one kind at the expense of other, using the subsidy system?
Apart from...
I mean, I'm thinking here of the possibility of censorship. You already mentioned that work of art.
Okay, censorship really cannot be regarded as the government deciding not to fund one photographer or one poet or ballet.
I've heard it so described.
But it isn't.
If they withhold public funds, well, you're censoring us, the cry goes up.
No, that's not true. For instance, if you decided not to go into an adult bookstore and decided not to buy one of their publications, that's not any action of yours that could be construed as suppressing their publication or
No.
interfering with their business. And in the same way, it's not suppression of ballet if the government decides not to pay for it. Censorship involves the initiation of force against a publisher or playwright or an orchestra. And I'm afraid that last year, in the case of the art director, the museum director in Cincinnati, there was censorship afoot when he was arrested and put on trial for promoting obscenity.
Does this subsidy of certain kinds of music against others, in your view, does that influence the development of art? Is that influencing what people perceive as good art? I mean,
Well, certainly so. Government subsidies provide fuel for the careers and projects of the favored artists and denies the resources to others. In fact, remembering that everyone gets caught on the tax net, which is to say that all artists pay taxes. So
Yeah.
government subsidies require all artists to pay, but permit only some to collect. Therefore, necessarily, government spending on the arts transfers money from all artists and gives it only to favored artists. More artists are impoverished by government subsidies to arts than artists are enriched.
and how does this bear, though, upon the development of music in the society? I mean, how does is it, for instance, suppressing one kind and advancing another?
Oh, certainly so. And the decision is entirely up to the people that dole out the money. Some months ago, on a television program where a number of art snobs and culture vultures were being exhibited and interviewed by, I think, by Donahue, one of the people in the audience related a story that illustrates the danger. That the man was a rock musician. He had applied to the culture Nazis for some subsidies. And they told him right out, well, we're not going to give you anything because rock is not art. So here we are with...
They actually said that rock is not art.
That was his recounting of the adventure.
Now, I can understand some lovers of classical music having that opinion, but this was some government official building out public money
Yes.
And taking that very, very biased position.
Yes, pronouncing what art was and what art was not,
Wow.
and going ahead that way.
And that has been done before, as we observed at the beginning of this program.
Oh, certainly so. The Nazis weren't about to spend money on the performances of music by Mahler or Mendelssohn, for those composers were Jewish.
Yeah.
Instead,
Yeah.
the Nazi dollars, or Nazi Reichsmarks, went went to music of Wagner, Richard Strauss, and racially correct people.
Yeah.
It's offensive not simply to human freedom, but to artistic freedom, that some artists can be fed to others. And in truth,
That's what's happening, isn't it?
well, it is, certainly. Again, and it bears repeating, I guess, all artists are caught in the tax net, only some artists receive.
Yep.
So government programs transfer money from some artists and give it to others. And this is offensive not simply to human freedom, but to artistic freedom. And no true lover of the arts would wish to see this program, this policy continue.
Yeah, yeah. Don Wood, we thank you very much indeed for joining us and for the insight that you've given us into this really quite important question of what we listen to and what we see. You teach music, you give lessons,
Yep.
you are sitting at a piano. Would you play us out with something?
All right. Here's some music from Joseph Haydn.